What Gurkha soldiers did after a German major rejected their demand to surrender March 28, 1945, near the German town of Celle. The war was ending. Everyone knew it. The artillery in the distance sounded weaker than it had months before. Refugees clogged the roads. German units were surrendering by the hundreds. Entire villages waited nervously for Allied troops to arrive. And yet, on that cold gray morning, a group of British officers found themselves staring at something they could barely believe. A German major stood behind a barricade with barely 80 exhausted soldiers. Around him were hundreds of civilians, women, children, old men, and despite being completely surrounded, he had just refused an offer to surrender. The British captain lowered his binoculars. What did he say? The interpreter swallowed. He said he will not surrender while civilians are still trapped inside the town. Silence followed. Nobody understood. The German position was hopeless. The war was practically over. Yet the major had rejected the demand. And what happened next would leave hardened soldiers speechless. A few hundred yards away, Gurkha troops from the British Indian Army waited quietly beside a muddy road. Their rifles rested against their shoulders. Their kukris hung at their belts. Most had fought across jungles, mountains, and battlefields for years. They had seen enough death to last several lifetimes. But even they sensed something unusual was unfolding. Captain Edward Harris received the report shortly after noon. He gathered several officers around a field table. Maps were spread across the surface. Rain tapped against a canvas cover overhead. The German major refuses to surrender, Harris said. Lieutenant James Walker frowned. Why? He claims artillery will kill civilians. Walker looked confused. He knows he's finished. Apparently. Sergeant Thomas Reed crossed his arms. Maybe he's buying time. Nobody answered. That possibility worried everyone. German officers had used tricks before. False negotiations, delays, ambushes. The town sat in a dangerous position. A direct assault could end the standoff quickly. But civilians remained trapped throughout the streets. Nobody wanted unnecessary bloodshed. For several hours, messages moved back and forth. British officers sent surrender terms. The German major rejected them. Again and again. Each time the answer came back the same. No surrender. Not while civilians remained in danger. As darkness approached, tension spread through the Allied lines. The Gurkhas watched silently from their positions. One of them, Rifleman Dil Bahadur Garoon, studied the distant rooftops. Beside him sat Rifleman Tek Bahadur Rai. What do you think? Rai asked. Dil Bahadur shrugged. I think nobody wants to die today. The answer lingered in the cold air. Neither man spoke again. Inside the town, conditions were worsening. Food was nearly gone. Medical supplies had disappeared days earlier. Families hid in cellars. Children cried whenever artillery sounded in the distance. German soldiers moved through streets that looked more like ruins than neighborhoods. Many wanted to surrender. Most believed the war was already lost. Yet Major Carl Fischer remained firm. His officers gathered around him in a damaged municipal building. A single lantern illuminated the room. Captain Ernst Weber looked exhausted. We cannot hold much longer. Fischer nodded. I know. Then why refuse? The room stayed silent. Fischer looked toward a cracked window. Outside, civilians moved between shattered buildings. An elderly woman carried water. A boy dragged a wooden cart. Neither should have been anywhere near a battlefield. Fischer finally answered. Because once artillery begins, they will suffer more than we will. Nobody spoke. For a moment, the war disappeared. There were no uniforms. No ranks. Only human beings trapped inside a nightmare. The next morning, Allied commanders met again. The situation had become increasingly frustrating. Every hour delayed the advance. Every hour risked new casualties. Arguments filled command tents. Some officers demanded force. Others urged patience. Then a message began moving upward through the chain of command. Reports crossed desks. Recommendations followed. Eventually, the matter reached a senior headquarters. And from there, word was sent to one man, General George S. Patton. The news surprised several officers. Patton was known for speed, aggression, momentum, the rapid destruction of enemy resistance. Many assumed he would order immediate action. Nobody expected what happened instead. Late that afternoon, vehicles arrived near the front. Engines stopped. Soldiers straightened instinctively. Conversations ended. The atmosphere changed. Patton stepped from a staff vehicle. Mud covered the road beneath his boots. His ivory-handled pistols rested at his side. He said nothing at first. He simply listened. Officers explained the situation. Reports were handed over. Maps unfolded. The general studied every detail carefully. The room remained quiet. Everyone waited. Patton looked at the casualty estimates, then at the civilian population figures, then at the reports concerning Major Fisher. Minutes passed. Nobody interrupted. Finally, Patton raised his head. Has anyone spoken to him face to face? No, sir. Patton nodded slowly. Then we're going to. Several officers exchanged glances. Nobody had expected that answer. The following morning, a meeting was arranged. Under a temporary ceasefire, representatives from both sides approached a damaged church outside town. The building stood scarred by years of war. Broken glass covered the floor. Rainwater dripped through parts of the roof. Major Fisher arrived first. His uniform showed signs of exhaustion. So did his face. Moments later, Allied representatives entered. Patton followed. The room instantly felt smaller. Fisher recognized him immediately. Everyone did. The German major stood rigidly. Patton looked at him. The room went silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Then Patton stepped forward. His voice stayed calm. Major Fisher. General, you understand your position? Yes. You cannot win. I know. Patton paused. Everyone waited. Then explain why we're standing here. Fisher took a breath. For several seconds, he seemed unsure how to answer. Finally, he spoke. Because there are nearly 2,000 civilians inside that town. Nobody interrupted. If artillery begins, many will die. His voice remained steady. I am responsible for them. Silence returned. Patton studied him carefully. Not as an enemy. As a man. As an officer. As someone carrying a burden. The general slowly walked toward a broken window. Outside stood ruined houses. Destroyed roads. Evidence of everything the war had become. He remained there for several moments. Then he turned back. What if we evacuate them? The room froze. Fisher blinked. Several Allied officers looked surprised. The German major stared at Patton. You would do that? Patton's expression never changed. We're here to finish a war, Major. Not slaughter civilians. Nobody spoke. The silence felt different now. Heavier. More human. By afternoon, preparations had begun. Under supervision from both sides, civilians started leaving the town. Women emerged first, then children, then elderly residents. The roads filled with frightened faces. Many carried whatever possessions remained. Blankets, photographs, small bags. Entire lives reduced to objects held in trembling hands. Gurkha soldiers lined portions of the evacuation route. Their presence reassured nervous civilians. Rifleman Dil Bahadur noticed a little girl clutching a rag doll. She looked terrified. He reached into a ration pouch and handed her a piece of chocolate. The girl stared at him. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she accepted it. Her mother began crying. Dil Bahadur said nothing. He simply nodded. Sometimes humanity required no words. Hour after hour, civilians streamed from the town. German soldiers watched quietly. Many seemed relieved. Some lowered their heads. Others stared at the ground. They knew the end was near. As darkness approached, the final groups departed. Medical teams checked the wounded. Refugees received food. For the first time in days, the town no longer felt trapped. The next morning, Major Fisher returned to the church. Patton waited inside. Several officers stood nearby. Nobody spoke initially. Fisher removed his gloves. His hands shook slightly. Whether from exhaustion or emotion, nobody knew. He reached into his tunic. Several soldiers tensed. The German major withdrew a folded document. Formal surrender papers. The room remained silent. Fisher stepped forward. His eyes moved briefly toward the window, toward the town, toward the civilians who had escaped. Then he handed over the papers. I surrender my command. Patton accepted them. No celebration followed. No cheers. No triumphant speeches. Only silence. Because everyone present understood something important. This surrender was not about victory. It was about responsibility. The responsibility carried by soldiers. The responsibility carried by officers. The responsibility carried by human beings during the worst moments imaginable. Outside, German troops began laying down their weapons. Rifles were stacked. Vehicles surrendered. The war, at least for them, was over. The Gurkhas watched quietly. Rifleman Rai looked toward the German column. Strange. Dil Bahadur nodded. What is? They fought for years. And now, Rai watched prisoners walking down the road. Now they're just men. Neither soldier spoke again. Weeks later, Germany would surrender completely. The war in Europe would end. New generations would inherit stories from those who survived. Some stories would be about battles, others about heroes, some about terrible acts, and some would be about moments when people chose humanity over destruction. Years later, many who witnessed those events remembered one thing most clearly. Not the surrender, not the negotiations, not even the famous general. They remembered the civilians walking safely down that road, children holding their mothers' hands, old men helping neighbors, families surviving because enemies chose restraint, because soldiers chose patience, because commanders remembered that military victory meant little if humanity was lost along the way. War reveals the worst parts of mankind. History proves that again and again. But sometimes, in the middle of destruction, people make decisions that remind us who we are supposed to be. A German major refused to surrender because he feared for civilians. Gurkha soldiers protected those civilians as they escaped. And a general known for aggression chose mercy when he could have chosen force. In a world consumed by war, that choice mattered. It still does. Because long after battles are forgotten, humanity is what remains. What would you have done? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more World War II stories where humanity, war, and difficult decisions collided, make sure to subscribe.